Martin with Magic City Books. I'm so thrilled to have you all here on a very special night. This is part of our ongoing virtual author series, which we've been doing for many, many months since April of last year. We did about 100 of these in 2020, believe it or not, and we're kind of kicking off the year with a bunch. We're going to kind of keep doing these 2 or 3 a week, usually on Mondays and Thursdays, but sometimes we get the great opportunity to do a book launch because, as many of you know, books come out on Tuesdays, and that's just what happens in the book world. So we'll occasionally get a rare chance to launch a book, which we'll be doing tonight. Got a lot of great stuff lined up. Go to our website, Magic City Books, and you can see the full schedule throughout the next few months. We're already even planning into the summer. You know, I think we'll be doing these virtuals for a while like this, and we'll see where we are in the fall. Maybe at some point we can start kind of creeping back in towards normality, and maybe even doing some outside things as weather permits, and if that's more a safe option. But this has been a really great way to stay connected with all of you, our readers, and actually connect with people beyond Tulsa, beyond Oklahoma. We've had viewers from outside the country even for certain events. So that's been a really nice way to use this platform in a new way. I've been so thrilled to have the opportunity to do many events with both of our guests tonight. And Brandon Hobson, for example, we've done several events together. We actually got a chance to do a really fun event for Where the Dead Sit Talking at the bookstore. It was really a great night. And gosh, the journey from that moment to now has been such a whirlwind. I'm sure you'll hear a little bit about that tonight. But the Removed, I was going to call the Removed kind of like Brandon's major label debut, as if it was like a band or something. But that would be like if Nirvana's first album, Bleach, was like nominated for best album at the Grammys, though. So it's not truly an apt comparison because he's already kind of become a rock star between now and then. But I think you'll see by reading this new book, every book that Brandon puts out, it feels like kind of like the obvious next step in his journey as a writer. And you kind of think, what's he going to do next? How is he going to top this last one? Where the Dead Sit Talking was such a powerful book. And obviously books are not the same. We don't compare them, but the kind of evolution of his work and becoming a truly, I think one of our great American novelists and someone who represents Indigenous culture and our state so well. And we're so proud of all the things he's done. I also couldn't be more thrilled to have my good friend Rilla Askew on as moderator tonight. And I've known Rilla for, 20 odd years, and we've done a zillion things together in all kinds of different capacities over the years. And if there was, I always say this, it probably embarrass her, but if there was a Mount Rushmore of Oklahoma authors, Rilla would certainly be on that. And she's been such an inspiration to so many other writers of different generations, and is always so willing to lend some advice or kind of help kind of get you up that next rung of the ladder. So so thrilled. So you're going to have Rilla and Brandon in conversation tonight about this wonderful new novel. We're going to have some questions at the end. So if you have some questions, please go ahead and drop those into the Q&A at your leisure, and we will get to those towards the end of the conversation tonight. And most importantly, you need a copy of The Removed, and we're going to put a link to get that book right here in the chat function, so you can do that. And it's Groundhog Day, so if you need more than one copy to read over and over again, we can certainly handle that as well. So for gifts, for friends, for family, do that and support Brandon's work. And so I will hand it over to Rilla right now to get the conversation started, and we'll be back to answer some questions in just a bit. So I'll hand it over. Rilla, Brandon, congratulations.
Thank you, Jeff.
Well, hey, Brandon. Good to see you, and congratulations. Pub Day.
Thank you.
This is it, yeah. So, and Jeff just told me something I didn't know, which is that new books come out on Tuesdays. I think I just never put that together, but what an honor it is to be able to be with you here on the actual date of publication of The Removed, which is a book that has been highly anticipated by a lot of people, including me, ever since I heard you read from it at the AWP conference in San Antonio, just like 1 week before the country went into pandemic madness. So we were fortunate to be in the same space at that time, and I loved what I heard then, and I have so loved the book. I've so loved reading it, and so I just want to start with a quote from Mark Athitica's review that was in USA Today, which it's just a glowing review and a really accurate review in my opinion, but there's one line in here that just knocked me out. He says, "It's a surprisingly magnetic and eerie book, like a concrete brick that cracks open to reveal a sparkling geode, throwing off a strange light." And I would say, amen to that. So asking you a question. So I think the thing that I love about that is that concrete brick, or that sort of solid, real, mundane kind of thing, and then inside is this geode with this eerie light. How would you say that he's like got what it is about this book? Because there are the elements of it that are eerie and almost like speculative fiction, and then there are elements that are so concrete and so real and so dealing with everything that's happening, in everyone's world today. So you want to talk to that?
Yeah, thanks, Rilla, and thanks for doing this with me. I really appreciate you and your contribution to the state of Oklahoma, which is obviously my home state. But I do want to sing your praises, because if anybody's not read Fire in Beulah, is the one that I always come to, right? Because I think that book should be taught in all Oklahoma history classes, and it's such a beautiful novel, and it's so difficult being about the Tulsa Race Massacre, and not being taught enough and talked about, and so I'd encourage everybody, to read all of Rilla's books. One of the great Oklahoma writers. But anyway, I'm
really asking about that mashup. He says it's inside, and I think it's like a mashup between the realism and the nonsense.
So in this book, there is, it's about a family who is really going through struggle, and the struggle. So the whole book began, and let me start here. The book began like what Chekhov says, fiction should explore questions. And I always begin with a question or questions when I start drafting something. And so in this case, it was, how do we heal from trauma, right? And I had been reading so much about violence against natives, and specifically violence against Native teenagers, that wasn't getting the national media attention. This was back, in 2017 or 2018. I had really been thinking a lot about this before I started writing this. And at the same time, I was also reading a lot of the old traditional Cherokee stories from there's a man named James Mooney who documented a lot of the old stories that came to Oklahoma orally, right? They came to Oklahoma, and then he documented them. And I wanted a place in contemporary fiction where these stories can exist. So I knew I wanted to sort of those old traditional stories that are often very sort of dreamlike and call it mythology if you want, but they have those sort of qualities that whether they're creation stories or whether they're nature stories or whether they're animal stories, they all sort of come together and talk about the world that we live in. So I knew that with the mention in one of those stories of the Darkening Land, right, this sort of mythical place where people go after death until justice is served. And I was thinking about the question of what is justice? How do we define justice today? And how do we define, healing after such trauma, especially when you're talking about violence? And so all those questions, which are big, big questions, are the ones that I started with. And so the sections that become sort of, mythological are sort of spirit world sections that involve one of the family members, those were actually really fun to write because, you know, I could, in the space of the darkening land, I could send Edgar there, and Edgar having his own sort of issues with drugs and depression, and finds himself in this where I thought, now this is the fun part of the fiction writer, because anything can happen in this space, you know, and that becomes, you know, a big part of writing for me comes from pleasure. And I talk about this with students a lot. The writer Charles Johnson talks about, Charles Johnson was a student of John Gardner's, and he has a fantastic craft book, which the title escapes me, but he talks in that book a lot about the pleasure that we get as fiction writers, right? So the spiritual scenes, you know, I almost offset the real scenes, because the real scenes being so full of you know, pain and the suffering, that this trauma that this family's dealing with, I wanted to do something a little bit more in terms of craft level fun. Yeah. That's a long answer. I know.
I'm really glad you have long answers. That's great. I have a lot of questions, but not so many questions. So, well, that was really interesting how you described those sections as being fun, and they aren't in so many ways, but they're also terrifying.
Absolutely.
As another world might be. One of the other things that I really love about the book is all of the Oklahoma references that are in addition to, so I'm always interested in place, and I lived for many years in Tahlequah, as you know, and knew your uncle Leon in those years in Tahlequah. I noticed that the book is dedicated to him and your other uncle, and that really made me happy to think of. And so many people call Tahlequah, which is for people who don't know, the capital of the Cherokee Nation. It's where, after the removals, it's the area where they set up their first capital and their headquarters, and where they came in Indian Territory and first settled after these brutal removals. And so there are a lot of people who call Tahlequah the Quah. And so I'm really interested both in how you transmogrify that actual place so that it becomes not the Tahlequah that's in eastern Oklahoma that we know, although I did notice Morgan's Bakery and a few other place names that, and so it's because I'm familiar with that place, I see those places superimposed on this place that in Quah that you have created here in your novel. So I would be interested in hearing you talk about what happens for the fiction writer when you're grounding it in real place and in real stories, the brutality of the removal, and the real stories of these many things that you're dealing with that are really contemporary, which I'll come back to that in again. But how do you give yourself freedom to write about something that's grounded in reality and freed from the fetters of realism?
Well, that's a very good question. And that's one of the reasons I think that as fiction writers, we can create a fictional city or town, which is what I did with my last book. That way somebody can't say, hey, you mentioned that one street, but that store is not on that, you know, so there's always got to be somebody that points out, you know, something to try to be a wise guy. Right. But I didn't call the town Tahlequah to ground it. I gave it that sort of slang name of Quah, right? It is somewhat known as the Quah, right? But in the way that I wanted to mythologize it in a very surreal way, right? And in a way that, and Jeff could maybe speak more, I'm not going to ask him to come back on, you know, but I mean, the way that Wes Anderson makes his films about what feel like New York City, but it's not really New York City, but you think it's New York City, but there's something a little bit strange about the city that kind of gives it, you know, sort of a feel. Polanski did that also with he couldn't film in New York, but he kind of made this New York feel and when he was in Europe. Anyway, I'm really interested in place and sort of just mythologizing it a little bit so that it's not entirely, it's the area, but it's also a little bit dreamlike. I'm interested in that because I feel like, fiction exists such in a space of dreams, right? That my dreams are very, I remember my dreams almost every night. They're very vivid. And in a way, I always think, doesn't it feel to me like when I'm reading often that the way I visualize things as I'm reading is often very closely related to the way that I dream things. There's always that sort of, it's a little bit blurry or a little bit distorted. And that sort of vision of place, right? And I wanted to make it a little bit tilted, of the camera tilted just a little bit, like in the old Adam West Batman, when it would show the Joker and Cesar Romero, they tilted the where it was like, it's just a little bit off instead of being straight on, right? Yeah. And so that's really, I feel like I like to write about real things and obviously real people in real situations, but I like to just sort of blur them a little bit because that for me becomes part of the pleasure in being a fiction writer.
Yeah. John Gardner used to talk about the fictional dream, that we're looking always to create the fictional dream. And sometimes we talk about, well, if we do this in the writing, we're throwing the reader out of the dream. They don't really like that. So we want to keep that dream spinning. But yes, so that's one of the things that I find so interesting in the book is how you're dealing with. So if just to name a few of the elements that we're dealing with all across the nation and really around the world, autism, Alzheimer's, foster children, substance abuse, climate change. There's so many elements that they're just threaded all the way through, and they are keenly realistically rendered. So the autistic child, the father who is in the early stages of autism, all of those elements of heartbreak are absolutely there, but they're also, as you talk about it, there's I guess I would almost say mysticism of the overall book makes it in some ways bearable, and also I don't know, how did you come to writing back? I would be interested in hearing you speak about foster children, and because of course that's the much of the subject of Where the Dead Sit Talking, your previous National Book Award finalist novel, but also how you deal with these the real killing of Native individuals, particularly young Native men, and then you put it in this non-realist novel. Where's the mashup? How do you do that?
Well, yeah, I tried to write this one thread at a time, right? Unlike my last book, which was a linear narrative, right, from basically point A to point B. The narrator is saying, I'm going to tell you about this time in my life for this period of time. And then we get to that period of time. It's a very linear first-person story. And with this one, I wanted to do something a little bit different, which is have several of those, right? Take place over within the span of 1 week. So the novel is September 1st through September 6th. So it's a span of like 6 full days. And each thread, each family member's thread. So I did one at a time, and thought about, I want to make this feel as important today, even though much of this comes out of 200 years ago, because part of Chala, who is the spirit ancestor, and again, his sections were fun to write because he's a spirit narrator, right? Who is speaking in epistolary sections to his son, saying, here's what happened, right? When the soldiers, when Andrew Jackson sent the soldiers in, we fought, and they killed us because we didn't want to leave, which is actually, Chala is based off of a real man I had been reading about, named Chali. Gary Hobson actually helped me with that pronunciation, but I had been reading about him and was sort of haunted by the fact that he had died for simply refusing to leave, right? And fought to try to, protect his home and was killed for it. So Chala was based off him, but Chala is a spirit. So within the realm of his thread, again, like Edgar's in the Darkening Land, I can, as a fiction writer, pretty much go wild and I want to ground the historical information of here is what happened during removal, but also, right, I can move around now because I'm a spirit, and I can go to a mountain and describe what's going on with the people hiding in the mountain, and what's going on in the sky at night, and sort of float around as a spirit, which became, I mean, again, I don't want to keep using this word fun, but the pleasure that Charles Johnson talks about, and essentially, he's echoing John Gardner, and I think that that's evident in a lot of John Gardner's work in his own fiction, certainly. But so the spirit, I did each thread one at a time because I couldn't jump, from going from Chala to Maria, who I wanted Maria to be a very sound, the voice of reason, the person who is able to sort of, I don't know how well I did it, but I really wanted her to be a very strong woman character. And so, I could only, I wasn't able to jump back and forth. So it was, yeah.
That was one of my questions. So I will, yes, I thought you did it beautifully. In my opinion, as a woman, I would say, so that is one thing that, so you write from in the voice of two separate women in the book, Edgar's sister, Sonja, and also Maria, his mother. And they're both beautifully rendered. And I never for a moment, and they're in first person, and I never for a moment as a reader got thrown out of the dream saying, women don't think like that, ever. They're all first person voices, and they're all distinct. And so that was one of my questions I was thinking about, were you, because the ways that they're laid out in the book, the ways that they come to us seem absolutely natural. And so I was wondering if you had sort of, did you foresee that as you were looking at the entire arc of the book? But you're telling me, no, you wrote just hers, and then just his, and then just hers, and just his. Yeah. Okay.
And Maria's section too, and I should point this out, I may have told you this in San Antonio, and I don't know how many beers I had, so correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just kidding. No, I had originally written Maria's sections in third person, right? And was not feeling overly confident. Part of it was my fear of getting inside her head and thinking, not being confident to take the risk. I'm telling my students all the time, as a fiction writer, take risks, right? Be risky. And yet here I was, not following my own advice and feeling like, this is an older woman who's lost a child. I can't, can I really get inside her? I ended up having to really, as one does, do research and talk to someone who had actually, experienced the death of a child, um, but originally they were in third person, and then at some point my editor was like, "Why do you have only her sections in third? Because she, is really the sort of voice here that we need to be connected to, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I mean, I guess I can try it." So I rewrote her entire section, in first, and she worked with me through it. And I mean, that's really how it came to be. But part of the fun, to go back to the fun of fiction writing, is like acting. And I know really that you and Paul certainly, have experience with acting, and I've told you this before, but a lot of the pleasure in fiction writing, first person fiction writing, is getting inside the heads of different characters, which surely actors must experience. Like, wow, what a fun character to play. And I think we think, what a fun character to write. Right.
It is. It's an embodiment. When you really go there, and I feel like you really go there in this book, that it really is, you are embodying another persona, another character. And I would say that it happens in close third as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be in first person, but when it's a compelling first person voice, that really is the thing that's happening. And of course, actors do it with their entire instrument, and we just do it in our heads with words. But
yeah, close third, I would say absolutely. A very close third person is not much different than first person, right? And it's so absolutely. Yeah.
So one thing, when we get to Chala's, I think it's not his penultimate, but his last voice, but that great, fantastic, apocalyptic vision. I was so taken with it. I don't want to say too much because I want the readers to just experience it as they go there. But I'm even more fascinated when you tell me that you wrote his pieces all in a sort of in I wouldn't say in a unified setting, but all as one. So you just built to that as you were going there. I mean, to me, the transgenerational trauma, the very trauma itself of the removals, is and the genocide, all across this landmass, is so powerfully rendered there. And so I guess I would just be interested in hearing you speak about that and how you wrote your way to that, and sort of what it did in you. I don't think was that fun?
No, that talking about that was not fun. The sort of description, and just thinking, okay, I'm writing from an ancestral spirit who's able to sort of move around, and that idea is fun, I guess. Or, I mean, fun again is the wrong word. I should say pleasurable, right? That, it's fulfilling, I think, to us, and as we create. But they were very difficult. Chala's sections were very difficult to write, in that, I knew I really thought about what it was like to, as we do, to put ourselves there, right? And really getting descriptive with everything that he was seeing, and the wagons and the disease and the sickness, and talking about that removal. It's very difficult, but I mean, we have to write about difficult things. We have to write. You wrote about, I mean, just, in Fire and Beulah, and we have to write about difficult things. And I think, as Nikki Giovanni says, right, the great Nikki Giovanni says, doesn't that make us more empathetic, right? Doesn't don't stories draw us, to empathy? And I think that difficult subjects draw us to, in literature, draw us to become more empathetic people. Do you feel like that?
Absolutely. I think I think of all the art forms, it's the one where the reader becomes more unified with another experience, even more than film and other, stage plays and so forth. The audience member feels what that character is feeling, but with the privacy of the reading experience and what happens in fiction, to fully imagine yourself in someone else's life as the writer and as the reader. Certainly, I think it gives us that. And if we're to understand who we are as a nation and why we're still so wounded and why we're still suffering so much as we are, we have to go to the past. We have to understand, just as your book does, that the ancestors are still speaking to us, and that all those unhealed wounds are still affecting us. And it happens through character, and that's what you do so brilliantly in your book. So we're talking about these sort of grand, abstract ideas, but in fact, in the book, it's a compelling narrative of a family that has suffered a great wound, a great trauma, parents filled with yearning, and and nothing has been redeemed. Nothing has changed, because there's been no accountability, actually, for Ray Ray's death any more than there is for the removals themselves. And so that's really what you do brilliantly. So I'm interested in how you came to. So I know you wrote each of them separately, but how did you dream those characters awake? How did this become the family for you that you were writing about?
I think that often what we do is we write through. A lot of times I do an exercise. In fact, I just did an exercise with my students where, in order to help find a character, I asked them to come up with 3 personality traits of someone that they know very well, right? Maybe the person loves sports, the person is quick-tempered, and the person is a cancer survivor or something, right? And then to turn around and take the opposite and write down those 3 opposites, right? And start there, and then create a scene and add another person, right? And if you, because we know people, so whether it's a parent, a sibling, a best friend, a partner, and their personality traits, but to write down the opposite and start there. So I follow a lot of the exercises that I share with my students, and we talk about this. So that was one that, in order for me to help understand, like, for example, Sonja's character, the daughter, I know I wanted her to be sort of romantically obsessed with this guy, non-native guy, but I didn't feel like I really knew who she was. So, I followed this. She becomes very sort of, a very strong, dominant, very opinionated, controlling woman out of that exercise, right? So that's a lot of the way that I do it, and I think we really have to know the character before we can understand how they will react in certain situations, right? Which is totally different than the way you or I might react, right? If somebody broke into the house, somebody's going to react very different than I will, panic and not be very, I will be I'm very neurotic anyway, but anyway, whereas someone else would, maybe stand up and fight, and, so, I think doing those exercises helped helps us to understand how different characters react in different situations. So that was one. That's really getting to understand the character, I think, is very important to begin writing, especially if you're tackling something, you want to attempt something very long, right?
That's a great exercise. I'm stealing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
For one of my fiction classes, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I stole it, I'm sure, from some. I have no idea. I mean, I'm not taking credit for it, because most of what I get is from learning from other people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. So I'm interested about this for this novel and for a novel, which is you begin with this huge question, with this really unanswerable question, and then you put these characters. You dream the characters awake, is how I always think of it. And so you have all the history. You have the stories that you were, the handed down stories that you were reading at the time. You have the transgenerational trauma and all those elements that you put together, and then doing these exercises. It's all still grounded in character. And so I'm wondering, do you also work in stories, in short stories? I mean, short fiction, or creative nonfiction?
I do. Well, not so much in creative nonfiction. I don't really enjoy that so much. But I do write short stories. I don't enjoy it as much. I have to sort of, I guess I have to exist in a space for a long time. And to think, this is a project that I want to work on for the next 2 years, and just, this is my project. And some people might go out and, they build a pergola or build a shed and work on, with their hands and redecorate or whatever. But I'm no good at any of that stuff, so, for me, it's working in a long space, and it ends up just being something that will turn into generally a novel. I have published some short stories. A lot of those are actually end up being part of one of the novels, but
yeah, that's the character of a novelist, that long immersion, and not everyone is cut out for it, really. Some people really are more cut out, their writing process is such that they don't have that ability to sit alone with a particular work for years at a time without it living out in the world, without sending it out in the world. And so I think that's almost like a trait or a characteristic, like you were talking about how you might analyze someone's characteristic. And because it's true that I think a lot of people want to be novelists, but not everyone is a novelist. And I think that sort of tenacity and that desire to be in slow, deep, long-term immersion are parts of the characteristics of novelists.
Yeah, and so much of it is just being disciplined. I mean, I feel like I'm just a disciplined writer that pretty much I can take a window of time. I mean, everybody has 24 hours in the day. You choose what you do with that 24 hours, right? So when I have a window of time, whether that's 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. or if it's, I have from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. today to do whatever I want, I'm going to go work on this. I consider it a success if I can write one page. If I get Stuart, our old friend Stuart Onan,
yeah,
who was a mentor to me and still is. We talk often. Always said, I mean, just try to get a page down a day, and in a year, a year you'll have
65 page manuscripts.
Right. And even if you took the weekend off and you think, well, okay, some days you're going to get more than one page, but your goal shouldn't be, I really need to write 7 pages or get 3,000 words down tonight. Right. That's because you probably will end up feeding it to the garbage, which you'll do a lot anyway. Right. So
it is very inefficient. writing novels is an extremely inefficient process. Well, let me ask you a bit just about your journey as a novelist, as a writer. And so would you speak a bit about your first two books published with small presses? And the material was quite different from both Where the Dead Sit Talking and The Removed, and what your process is. A lot of people, they want to be a writer, and they say, well, I don't know how to become a writer besides that you have to write. So would you just tell us a bit about your journey?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the very first book that I published was just a little chap book that was about 100 pages, and they were these sort of very short experimental pieces. It was called The Levitationist. Very small press. That was back in like 2006. Then it, you know, all the way to 2014, a small press, I published a book called Deep Ellum, which is set in the Deep Ellum district of Dallas. That's a small press. And then my dissertation for my PhD is called Desolation of Avenues Untold. That was a little longer. It's over it's like 340 pages or something. And it's an experimental novel around a lost Charlie Chaplin film reel. These last two books have tackled bigger issues. You know, those books did not tackle any kind of big issues. The last two books, and actually Where the Dead Sit Talking is an independent press, Soho Press. They're distributed by Penguin Random House, but they are actually, you know, an independent small press. I got a relatively small advance for that book. These two books have really tackled bigger issues. They just happen to be Native issues, right? But I've always wanted to, and I'll say this, I've always wanted to be the type of writer who tries new things and who does different things. I never want to be, you know, lumped into a category, right? As in, well, Hobson's a minimalist or an experimentalist, or, you know, whatever labels that, you know, are out there. I want to do, you know, I want to do different types of work, and that comes out of what I'm most interested in, I guess, at the time, and thinking most about, I guess. I mean, again, to go back to The Removed, I didn't think I would have another foster book, a book with a foster kid in it, and I don't know that I will again, but you know, the more that I sort of read about something, you know, and think about it, and start with the questions, like Chekhov said, you know, start with the questions and then go from there. These last two books have just really been like, you know, this is heavy shit, you know, that I'm thinking about. Yeah. So, you know, much more serious than the Chaplin book, or, you know, which was a lot of sort of, more experimental, because being my dissertation, I was burdened with heavy academic stuff all the time, and I needed that outlet for that novel to just be comical and absurd, and, you know, so.
Well, I think we're getting ready to perhaps answer a few questions. I will just say we've been talking about, as you say, some heavy stuff here, but yeah. I do want readers to know how much humor is also in this book, and, you know, there's so much of it that's so wonderfully compelling, and yeah, and just and full of humor. So in addition to all the heavy stuff that we're talking about.
Well, yeah, and just to bounce off that, I wanted the foster kid Wyatt in this book to be kind of humorous. You know, he reminds the family of Ray Ray, the kid who died, who was shot, But he also has this kind of, he's very different than Sequoia was in Where the Dead Sit Talking. Wyatt is this kind of bubbly, 12-year-old kid who feels like something from the past. He comes in, he has Dean Martin records and, jazz and swing, and he's wearing saddle shoes, right? And he has a briefcase, and he feels like something to Ernest, to the dad, as something from back in the 40s, right? Who is this little guy? And yet, so there's that element of the past coming in again to the, and so Wyatt was a really fun character to write.
I think we'll jump into some questions here. And I will say, if you have more questions, just fire them away. I believe Rilla would be happy to answer some questions too, if we have any for her as well. So let me just pull up a couple. We'll start with a really interesting one here from one of our viewers, Tori, who says, how do you balance the entertainment aspect of a fiction novel, meaning wanting to entertain people, versus representing the groups that you write about and the history that you're dealing with? That kind of responsibility of that balance.
Well, I don't think I don't know that it's a fiction writer's, the type of fiction that I like to read and write is really, the job is to entertain. I think there is a certain amount of, I don't know that we can, I talk about this in class sometimes, but if we call literature art, I don't know that art is just meant to just only entertain, right? It's meant to affect us in very deep ways. And so it sounds real pretentious to say, I want to be an artist, right? But I mean, I think that writing literary fiction often goes beyond that. And so I don't ever think about just entertaining a reader. If I'm entertaining anyone, it's myself, right? If that's who I'm entertaining when I'm writing, is I'm entertaining myself. And so I don't, you can really make yourself go crazy if you worry too much about readers. So I think, how do we talk about things like empathy, about suffering, about dying or living, remembering, all the things that the human condition, right? How do we approach talking about in artful ways? That's what I feel like is what literary fiction should be doing, and not necessarily entertaining.
So we have a question here that I would say is kind of unanswerable on the day a book comes out, but I'm going to kind of try to work it in. This is from one of our viewers, Christine, who says, I loved The Removed and the ending was incredible. So we're not going to spoil that, but I will say, and how do you go about doing an ending? Do you have a specific, I know that some people use outlines, some people write kind of from the idea back, some people have, how did you kind of find the wrap up point? Because we know so many writers who deal with, they can write every day, but it's kind of the finishing up, the kind of tidying up, the putting a ribbon on it at the end and finding that way out of the book that's so difficult for people.
I think for me, it's to echo what Don DeLillo, one of my favorite writers, Don DeLillo, says, is the image. So I always focus, now it doesn't always end on that image, but I have an image in my head, of what's happening. And I think this is the space where I want to end. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to get there, but this is what I see, this image. And so I don't necessarily, do any kind of rough outlining. I try to think in terms of what are scenes. I mean, I think in terms of images, if that makes sense. Rilla, what about you? Because I'm interested in what you do, or what you've done with your novels. Has it been more of an outline that you've structured outline that you've followed?
No.
Okay.
No, I begin with a question just as you do, and then I pull all the pieces together and dream the characters awake. I mean, it's very similar to what you talk about. And I don't always know where it's going. It depends on what the book is. I don't know. I just know that I have set up the question and I've set up the conflict, and it has to come to some resolution. And I wrote short stories for quite a while. And so sometimes my novels end more like a short story. And I would say that, in that sort of, not so much on the brink of change as it often is with a short story, but just one step short of full resolution. And I see that in the ending of both of this novel and Where the Dead Sit.
And to wrap it up in a bow and resolve, and is feels like often where we need to wrap things up and resolve it and tie it in a bow, and everything's all right in the end, but that's not the way that it works, right? We can often, I will often with students, say, actually your story ends up here. Isn't it more fascinating if it ends up here rather than down here? Because you're trying to wrap and tie it up in a bow, and so much of life itself is unresolved anyway, that I know that readers don't like things that aren't resolved. I know that,
You're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
It depends on the reader, but yeah, there's an expectation that we have about what a novel is, and that it will come to full resolution and denouement. Sometimes
I was reading something recently before we jump into our next question, which was talking about how, I guess, what's called the golden age of television over the last 20 years. So basically from Sopranos to now has kind of trained readers to actually be more interested in ambiguous storytelling, which is helpful to the literary novel because of things like The Sopranos or things like that, which have kind of it's episodic, it's long form, it doesn't give you answers to every single question, all these different things. And I just kind of found that interesting because I think we would assume that TV and things like that would kind of pull people out of that, like wanting to deep dive into it's a long form fiction or storytelling, but there is something to that, the anti-hero and all these different things that have been playing out has been kind of interesting.
That's really fascinating. I mean, because I feel like if anything, I'm too ambiguous, often, but that's good to know. Yeah. Jeff, I was going to ask you earlier, we were talking about place, and how Wes Anderson, you and I have talked about films a lot, and yeah. Wes Anderson, the way he, like in Royal Tenenbaums, for example, the way it feels like it's New York, but it's not exactly New York, that sort of blurred, you know what I mean? Yeah. I think Polanski did it in the movie with, and I'm not a huge Polanski fan, but the movie with about the devil that Johnny Depp was in, I can't think of the name of it.
Like The Ninth Gate.
The Ninth Gate, yeah. He does that with New York, but it's not New York. But it feels, and it's supposed to be New York, but it's a little bit sort of blurry, right?
Yeah, I don't even know what you call that, but I think it's kind of like, have you ever read The Unconsoled, the Ishiguro novel?
No, I haven't. Is that?
Yeah, so The Unconsoled is one of my favorite Ishiguro books, and it's about a concert pianist who is arriving in town to perform, and all he wants to do, the whole book is he wants to find a place to practice. And every time he tries to get a moment of peace to practice, something interrupts him and kind of keeps him from doing that one thing he wants to do. But it's in kind of this very generic Eastern European city, which also has like Kafka-esque kind of vibes to it, but you never quite know. Could be Prague, could be wherever. But I do like that kind of generalized idea of a place,
Yeah, I do know that novel that you're talking about because it starts, he arrives at checking into the hotel at the beginning, right?
Yeah. That's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
So we have another question from Caroline or Carolyn, forgive me. Whichever way you prefer. Were there other novels or collections that use multiple POVs that were influences on The Removed?
I don't know if there was one specific novel. I know that I'm a big fan of the book Four Souls by Louise Erdrich, and that uses within a small number of people that sort of go back and forth. She does that in a lot of her books, Yeah. but I don't know that it was a direct influence on me. That's a very good question. I think just part of it was the challenge of I haven't written a book with multiple narrators and with a narrator from the past, bringing in, some historical element and spirit. So I don't know that there was one.
This is from Diana, and she says, you talk about discussing elements of writing with your students. Would this be a book you would discuss with high school students?
Absolutely. I think it could, I think I would be more than happy to talk with high school students about it. Especially in terms of Chala's sections, right? And, in talking about the removal and the trail. So yeah, absolutely.
Brandon, we were talking about movies. This made me think about Don DeLillo, who I also love and has been a huge person in my life, especially up till Underworld.
Yeah.
And I just saw Noah Baumbach is making White Noise, so we'll have to talk about that later on. I can't. Wow. It's one of the strangest pairings I've ever heard of in my life, but we'll see.
I read that. I read an article about that. I don't like the casting in it because they feel too young.
Like Greta Gerwig and
what's his name? Yeah. They feel too young the way I envision. I can't think of the character's name, but he and his wife they feel much older than that. But I don't know. We'll see. If Noah Baumbach does it, it's very intriguing, right? I like a lot of his stuff.
I'm always excited about it because I just think more people will read White Noise, whether the movie's good or bad. It'll get re-put out, and more people.
Yeah, which is a great novel. Though it's so weird and wonderful.
And it seems to be timely about every 5 years, which is kind of the DeLillo way. So
yeah,
we'll do a couple more questions before we wrap up. We've got one more. Someone was talking about who you base your characters on, and they're basically getting to the point of, do you write about people in your own family? And if you do they know it ever? And do you tell them if they're inspiring some of the characters you're writing about?
Not really. I mean, that I haven't ever done that really. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, because everything that I've written has really been so far removed from me. I feel like, I don't know. Rilla, have you? Do you?
If any of my characters are inspired by family members, I definitely would never tell my family members.
Oh yeah.
And
no, yeah.
And so yes, there have been some characters that have been inspired by people that I know, but you always mix it up with other things. So even, I don't write thinly veiled autobiographical fiction. There's a whole genre that does that. And so I think that can really work for some people. It's just not where I come from. And in any case, and I'm also teach writing creative nonfiction. And I've had students who were writing the family and then let the family read it, which I think is always a bad idea.
Yeah, I will say this. I haven't written about a family member or a person I know really well, but I do think about little things that they say or quirky things that maybe they do that I will incorporate into one of the characters, which, for example, my wife's grandparents who have passed on, but we used to joke about when she was a kid, her grandparents would go on vacation and they would send a postcard or whatever, and all they would talk about is where they ate. They would say, oh, well, Virgil had the chicken fried steak at, they, like, okay, what are you all doing? We don't care about where you ate. And we used to joke about that. And so that actually came out in Where the Dead Sit Talking with one of the foster parents' grandparents, where, they were sort of talking about where they were eating. So those kind of little things do come out, that I think are sort of funny, but certainly not based on anyone, a character.
Last question is this. I know a lot of people listen to audiobooks, and the audiobook of this is pretty interesting in the sense of has multiple narrators. One of the narrators of the book is Gary Farmer, who's a really fascinating person. If you don't know Gary Farmer's work, he's an actor, he's an activist, he's Native. You may have seen him in the great Jim Jarmusch film Dead Man and a lot of other films as well. How did it come about to kind of get some of these folks involved with it? Because it really, I haven't heard the audio version yet, but I'm sure it kind of really provides a really cool atmosphere for it.
I'm a huge Gary Farmer fan for that reason. I mean, Dead Man, you know, the Jarmusch film, which has some great Crispin Glover's in it, Johnny Depp, Gary Farmer. You know, it's a really dark and funny at times movie. But anyway, I followed him for a long time, and when they said who would you like to, we would like to get native, Harper Collins said we would like to get native readers, and you know, and he was on the list. I said, you know, so I was like, wow, I'm jumping up and down because I'm such a huge fan that he actually read the book and read Chala's sections. But you know, there were some other people like Delana Studi, Wes Studi's niece, who reads Maria's section, and you know, so you know, it's who's available, and you know, I did have some input on that, and but Gary Farmer Wes Studi wasn't able to do it. You know, unfortunately, I wanted him, you know, as well, but Gary Farmer is he's also a musician too. He's you know, he played.
Cool get. It's a very cool get. I want to say, just as we wrap up, you know, we've done so many of these virtual events. I was mentioning this to Rilla and Brandon earlier. We've gotten used to it. It's certainly not our preference, but this was one that kind of hurt a little bit that I was still looking forward to doing in person. I'm sad that we didn't get to kind of be in the same space and hug it out a little bit and do a big congrats, because it's a really big day. Pub day is always a big day. We call it your book birthday. So happy book birthday. For everyone who came out to watch tonight, please get a copy of this book. You're going to love it. You're going to want to tell people about it. You're going to want to talk to your friends about it. And then I think more importantly, you're going to want to go back and read Brandon's work if you haven't read his work prior to this. And certainly pre Where the Dead Sit Talking. There's some really fascinating stuff in there. So thank you, Rilla. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Brandon, congratulations. I hope you have a great virtual tour, and that, you know, every success that's due to you comes your way over these next months. And thank you, everybody, for watching.
Thanks, Jeff and Magic City. Yeah, really appreciate it. And Rilla, yes, as always, thank you.
Thanks. We'll all be in the same space again.
We will.
Hopefully not in the not too distant future.
That's right.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody. Stay safe, and we will see you all very soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jeff.
Bye. Thank you all.
Congratulations, Brandon.
Thank you.